Well, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's presentation. I'm Carol Latham, the Community Outreach Coordinator for the MUZEO, Museum and Cultural Center in Anaheim. And we continue to wish you and your circle of concern that you're doing well during this time. For those of you who don't already know, the MUZEO is a cultural and community hub with the mission to engage the community in exploring and celebrating our diverse heritage, culture, and arts. And we do this through creative programmings and events and exhibits and presentations like this. We appreciate your taking the time on a Sunday afternoon to join us. If you have questions, please add them to the chat, and we'll do our very best to make sure that they're answered throughout the presentation. This is being recorded, and so you'll be able to access it from our MUZEO website afterwards. The American Opal Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, educational in nature, and their primary purpose is to promote interest and the knowledge of this precious gem. They pursue the study and sharing of the information about opals. Many of you are returning for the third week. You have been here before when we talked about the history of opals and some of the nuances of the different types of opals and where they're found. Then some of you also joined us in the second week when we talked about opals of the Americas. Today, we're going to be talking about how to safely purchase and take care of this beautiful gem. We are pleased to have Pete Goetz back again as the presenter. In 1972, Pete obtained his BA degree from San Diego State University, where he majored in physical geography with a minor in geology. He is a 20-year member of the American Opal Society and has served 15 years of that time as the president. He is now currently President Emeritus. Pete is also a retired physical science teacher. Russ Madsen, who you will hear from periodically, and you might even see him on camera, served as the Society's board as the treasurer for 15 years. And he, like Pete, has a wealth of knowledge and information that they will share this afternoon. So again, thank you to you both, Russ and Pete, and we'll start off this afternoon's presentation with Pete. Thank you.
Okay, what happened to my presentation? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Let me back up here a moment. Uh-oh, where'd I go? Screen sharing is stopped. We can't have that. How do I get this thing out of the way? Okay. As Carol mentioned, the first week we talked a little bit about opal in general, some of its physical characteristics. And we looked at some of the similarities between opal and plain old everyday sand. And as you can see, the formula, the only difference is that amount of water. We looked at the structure of opal, which is basically a bunch of spheres in a nice, neat stack. We talked a little bit about how color was generated from white light by being diffracted, diffracted, whatever, and all kinds of things that happen in there. And we get color coming out the other end. And we talked a little bit about Australian opal. In the second week, we looked at American opal, and sometimes you'll hear this term volcanic opal. It's not really, the volcano doesn't make the opal. It's just that the opal, the volcano, when it cools, the gas bubbles leaves a little void where the opal can grow, so to speak. So in most of the American jewelry, opal, most of it, or not most of it, but a lot of it's used as specimens. You don't find a lot of jewelry made out of the pieces that come from the volcanic rock. Although there is some, and we'll talk about that some other time. All right, and we talked about Australia and it being sedimentary. The opal here is formed in sedimentary layers as opposed to gas bubbles in basalts. And you find that most of the Australian opal is used in some fashion of jewelry. All righty, so what we're going to talk about today, I hope, is how to buy opal jewelry, what to look for, not necessarily how to buy it. You just open your wallet, give the man the money, and then go home and cry. But I'm going to give you a little insight on what to look for when you're buying opal jewelry, and sometimes I'll weave in some information that's applicable to buying individual stones as well as buying a piece of jewelry. Okay, the first thing that, whether you read it, talk to people, whatever, the first thing is you need to educate yourself. Opal is just something that the American buying population is not real familiar with. I think I showed you last week, some examples of the type of jewelry you would see in a store. Basically white-based jewelry or white-based stones in gold jewelry. That's about what most people in this country think of. All right, so once you start to educate yourself, the first thing you want to ask is, why are you buying the opal? You don't normally buy opal for anybody. You don't really think about it as a general rule. So the first thing is, why are you buying this opal? Is it for graduation or a birthday or some kind of holiday? Now, I put the pumpkin down there because I saw that Veronica had a real live cat today. So I figured cats, Halloween. I don't know if there's any correlation there, but I just thought I'd say that. Okay. All right. And of course, if you've been married for 14 years, yeah, guess what you're going to ask the hubby for? Or the other way around, whatever. Opal. Opal is the 14th wedding anniversary designated stone. Now, you're going to educate yourself because education is power. Knowledge is power. So what power does this give you? This gives you the power to go into a store or go to an internet and be able to talk a little bit of the language so that you can understand what you're looking at and what somebody's telling you. Okay? All right, so one of the first things you want to do is you want to read. There's a ton of books out there on opal. There's on all aspects of opal. There's books on there that are written specifically about Queensland. There's books specifically written about Spencer, Idaho, which is a mining area, opal mining area. So you just, I don't know, I don't know if you go to libraries anymore, but wherever you find your list of books, you'll probably find something that has to do with opal. If you're a serious hobbyist, or if you're in the trade, or if you know somebody in the trade, there's a myriad of trade magazines. The Jewelry Artist used to be called the Lapidary Journal. That's pretty available. So isn't Rock and Gem. This one here, In Color, that's basically a trade magazine. That thing will cost you about $360 a year for about six editions. And then there's all kinds of other trade magazines. A lot of clubs put out articles about their particular specialty. We put out articles in the Opal Express, again, about opal, sometimes other things. And then, of course, there's the internet. No matter what you want to know, just go to the search thing and say, I want pink opal with yellow stripes. And I guarantee you, it's going to give you some kind of reference. So this is these items right here. If you make yourself available to indulge in them, you can learn more about opal than I know. Matter of fact, where did I get my information? About 70 or 80% of it comes from things like this. 10% came from rust, and the other 10% just came from making mistakes. All right. Or, now here's something you might find interesting, a rock shop. Now, the last rock shop that I know of was a grumpy old man over on Glassell. I forgot his name. I want to say Dave, but that's not true. But anyway, he didn't know a whole lot about opal, but he knew people that were in the opal trade. Because as vendors would come by, they would talk about various things, and so he or she might be able to direct you to an opal vendor that can help you with information, provide you with information, pamphlets, even if it's a sales brochure. It might be hyped a little bit, but there's going to be information in that sales brochure that's useful. All right, you can go to special events. Now, again, this is something you don't see too often. When I was in college, down on El Cajon Boulevard, about 73rd Street, there used to be a place called the Green Door. And you go downstairs, and it was one of those old-fashioned coffee shops, where you click your fingers and things like that. Well, people would put on discussions. They talk about all kinds of things. Mostly it was music, but every once in a while, you'd find somebody who would do something other than music. Okay, jewelry stores sometimes will have events to introduce a new artist or a new line of jewelry or jewelry opening, and they'll invite vendors of various backgrounds with stones. And so every once in a while you'll get an opal guy. This is what I was talking about earlier. These little boutiques sometimes will just have a little social thing. They'll have a little breakfast, or they'll have a lunch. They'll have a speaker, and they'll come in and talk about various topics. This one just happened to be on opal. And of course, my favorite is colleges. It's amazing what you can find on a college campus. Most college campuses have an art department, and a great deal of them have jewelry arts. I think that's the proper term. You have to check with Veronica on that one. She's the artist. But they have, their own little libraries. They got people there that are experienced. Now, their depth is somewhat lacking with opal, but they're going to be familiar with it. They're going to be able to direct you to sources that you can use to learn about opal. And then, of course, there's the MUZEO. Now, MUZEO is kind of interesting because even though they're a museum of culture, they get involved in other things, like what's cultural about an opal, but it might be interesting to all cultures. Now, if you want to get into the history, there is some cultural tie to opals, but that's way before my grandfather was born. Okay. So, any questions up till now? All righty. All right, now the next slide will be a little bit of a review. We talked last week about natural opal, and we talked about solid opal, and we learned that solid opals were just simply opal that has not been changed in any way. It's just been cleaned up, shaped, polished, and set into a piece of jewelry. So this is probably the most predominant type of opal you will find in jewelry. We talked a little bit about matrix. Now remember, there are two matrix, and we'll get to the second one in a few minutes. This kind of matrix is simply the opal that got mixed up with the host rock, and it makes all these really nifty patterns. Sometimes people will just take these as they are. They'll shape them out roughly, polish them, and pendants. Sometimes they'll put them in bezels, that type of thing. All right, boulders. We talked about how there's a host rock, the iron rock, which is this, or ironstone rather, which is this dark colored stone, and on it is a layer of opal. You can polish this up and cut these to various shapes, or how's that term, en naturel, and stick it in a bezel. or if it's small enough in a ring, or whatever you're designing. Okay, and we also talked a short while about the other matrix, which is the andamuka. This is the stuff that looks like concrete when you first find it, and you have to cook it. You have to cook it in sugar, and then you have to cook it in acid, and all these colors come out. Now, again, you shape it, can be put into a bezel, can be free set, that type of thing. As a side note, if you're cutting these and you don't like what you got and you reshape it, you might have to recook it, because this process is only good for a millimeter or two. Then you grind into the old white rock. All right, what we didn't talk about last week was assembled opals. Now, what the value of an assembled opal is cost. You can get the look of an opal for a whole lot less than buying a solid opal. Now, basically, this is opal that's been glued to some kind of backer, some kind of dark material, and it's covered with a quartz cap, quartz usually, or probably 95% of the time. All right, and the base can be something like onyx or basalt or obsidian. Now, this is kind of important that you choose a base that has the same thermodynamics as an opal. Because if you get something that's less dense or more dense than the opal, and you repeatedly hot, cold, what's going to happen? The expansion factor on the two different materials are going to expand at different rates, and it's going to cause that glue to become loose, and eventually your stone's going to fall apart. So when you're choosing a back, probably the best thing to use is black potch. Now, potch, remember, is opal with no color. All right, first thing we have is a doublet. Now, what a doublet is exactly double, two. There's two pieces here. You got a black, you got a black backer, again, whatever material you choose. And then you have a piece of opal that's too thin to actually cab out, but you can glue it to this black backer, and then you can go ahead and form it out and wind up with a decent looking stone, but it'll be very, very thin. Now, even thinner than that is the triplet. Triplet, we have the back. Then we have a strip of opal that's so thin you really can't do anything with it, but it's got lots of color. So you glue that to the back, and then you put a quartz cap on that. This is probably the most inexpensive way to purchase an opal, and I mean to purchase an opal that looks like an opal. Now, just as a side note, some people hear this term as solid opal. Some people don't consider doublets and triples as solid opal because they're glued to something, but the opal that's in there is solid opal. So however you want to judge that, that's up to y'all. And then this is what you get. Now tell me you can tell the difference between that opal and a real opal, I mean a solid opal. It's going to be tough to tell. Now on this opal, if you look real close, right down here, you're going to see a line. Whoop, what happened? Oh no. Okay, you're going to see a line, and that might be where the separation point is. But if you're looking straight down at that opal, or even if this was set in a bezel, which is one of the things you have to be careful about when you go into a store. If you pick up a piece of jewelry and you can't see the back of it, you might want to ask some questions, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so you can see opals and doublets can be very, very, very convincing. And as further proof, here's some examples of doublets. And I would say if you were a casual opal buyer and weren't familiar with the fact that doublets existed, and you saw that, and like this ring, with those bezels, it'd be really tough to tell that that's a doublet. And like I say here, the thing is that if you've got an unscrupulous dealer, he's going to tell you that's a solid opal, and he's going to charge you solid opal prices. All right, now in a few minutes, we'll talk a few ways about how we can determine whether that is or not. Now, going back to my prior discussion, he's not really lying to you when he says it's solid opal. What he's not telling you is that it's solid opal glued to another piece of material. Same thing with the triplets. You got the triplets. If you didn't know those were triplets, it'd be hard pressed to tell that those weren't solid opals that had that. Now, if you look at this ring, this doesn't have a bezel. If you pick this ring up and look at the side, you'll see the layers. So that's when you go into a jewelry store and you see a ring or a pendant or something that's got an opal in it, and if it's possible, pick the stone up and look at the side of it, and you'll be able to see where the different materials are, because it'll be a definitely straight line. A lot of times in opals, if they're naturally attached to a sandstone, not sandstone, but ironstone, that attachment level won't always be perfectly horizontal. Sometimes there'll be little inclusions in there. Okay. Whoop, forgot about you. Sorry, guy. All right. Now, we talked about doublets and triplets. There is another type of opal called synthetic opal, and I forgot to arrange them on here. So you guys are going to have to deal with me here. Now, this is man-made in a laboratory. Now, if you notice here, the composition of lab opals, silicon with water plus resin, okay? So one way you can tell if you're looking at a synthetic, if it looks overly bright and the pattern is very, very regular, most opals, even harlequin, you'll be able to see the squares, but they're going to be somewhat irregular. The contact points between the colors are going to be a little bit jagged. You're not going to see a real defined pattern. But sometimes when you're looking at lab-created opals, you'll see that. Now, this is an early one called Gilson. These were probably the initial or the beginning of the synthetic market. And anyway, this is material. These things are made from Gilson opals. And this is what they would look like. Now, the one in the middle is not cabbed, so you can see where that backer is, okay? And we have okay, I don't know if I mentioned, earlier I was talking to Russ. Okay, synthetic opals. Basically, there's a new one out called Bello and Bello Galaxy. And they're by, I'm going to assume, a Korean company, but I can't pronounce their name. I'm sorry. But this is the one when you go into a store and you see something that you're looking for, a doublet or a triplet or a synthetic, you might ask for that by name, Bello or Bello Galaxy. Now, the Bello's got two types of synthetic opals. They have one that's 80% silica, 20% resin. Then they've got one that's resin free. It's just basically silica and water. Now, another thing you can look at here is when you're looking at a synthetic, they generally mention, as I mentioned earlier, there's no inclusions. If it looks too clean, if there's no, it's like a diamond. There's no such thing as a clear diamond, because once you get past 10 power when you're looking at a diamond, it looks like, a sponge sometimes. So only up to a certain power. But when you're looking at an opal and you don't see a lot of inclusions, or you don't see any inclusions at all, you might consider the fact that it might be synthetic. Now, that's not to say that there aren't inclusion-free opals. I have some in my collection. Okay, now what this synthetic material looks like, it starts out, this is what it looks like after a year. It takes about a year to grow this stuff. Okay, now this is that new stuff I was telling you about, the Bello. And so you can see there's a lot brighter colors. Again, you can see where these are doublets. And there's a couple pieces of jewelry that are made with these new synthetic materials. All right, and the last type of opal you're going to run into is imitations or simulants. This is the bottom of the line, although you can somewhat get the look of an opal. Now these contain 80% resin and only 20% silica. So it's just the opposite of synthetics. So you're buying a lot of resin. All right, now there's a term, OLP, opal-like plastics. Now, the GIA, for some reason, has certified this material as being a legitimate imitation opal material, I guess. So when you're talking to the jeweler, you might ask him, if, once you've identified it as an opal simulant or imitation, just so to keep him on his toes, ask him if this is an OLP. And if he looks like you don't know he probably doesn't know what he's talking about. So put your money back in your wallet and go home. Okay. Now, one way you can tell is, again, if you can see the stone from the side, or whether it's mounted or not, the bottom part of the stone, the bottom third of it, is where you're going to find the color. Now, this won't be a cap. It'll be just made that way. Then there's this glass opalite. This is kind of new. This comes out of Hong Kong. And it basically, it does have some colors, but it's basically this milk glass. And this is some jewelry that's made out of these materials. So again, you can get that opal look for a whole lot less money, if that's your thing. So, guess what my next slide is? Okay. Do we have any questions? There was a lot of information in those 5 slides.
We have several questions.
Okay.
First would be to mention what's more valuable, black or white opal?
Okay. Without all things being equal, a black opal, the blacker, the better. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Black opals are the high-end opals. And in general, a black opal that displays reds and oranges are going to be your most valuable opals. White-based opals cover a white. Now, in a minute, I'm going to show you a body tone scale. And you're going to see, like, on this particular scale, there's 9 levels of body color. So you go from clear, and there's going to be 2 or 3 milky whitish base colors, and there's going to be a couple of grays, and there's going to be about 3 or 4 black tones. Now, in the untrained eye, it's going to be tough to see these. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but to answer the question directly, the blacker the body base, generally, with all things being equal, will be your more expensive opal.
Another question concerning opal, person buying rough opal, if it's stored in water, how long should a person wait to dry it out before they cut it and polish it?
Okay. Every cutter's got their own little formula. First of all, rough is displayed in water so that you can see the potential color. If I just walked up and handed you a dry piece of rough and said, here, I want $1,000, and you're going to look at me and go, well, okay, a white rock for $1,000. You're a nice guy. But if I put a little water on it and he sees the flash of color in there and what he could possibly gain by cutting it correctly, that $1,000 may be a bargain. So first, it's stored in water so that you can see the potential colors. How long can you wait to dry it out? Well, when you're cutting on opal, when you're grinding an opal, most grinders will use I don't know if I should, well, okay, I use a pixie. Some people use what's the genie?
Genie?
It's a bigger one than a pixie. And I grind mine wet. So I've got a water supply on my opal all the time. Now, there are some people, one of our, matter of fact, the president of our company, Stan McCall, he's probably one of the better cutters in the area. He has a tendency sometimes to cut dry. I've been in his shop and watched him touch up something, and he doesn't use a lot of water, or he uses it sparingly. He'll use a sponge. He'll keep a water in his tray, and then when he grinds, he'll wet the sponge, put it up against his wheel, and then he'll grind. But he doesn't have a constant water supply. So you can grind almost immediately after you take the opal out of water. Now, here's the kicker. Now, this is a personal thing for me. Okay, so I don't grind opal that I just bought. If I buy a parcel of opal this year, I probably won't cut on it until next year when I buy another parcel. I do that for a couple of reasons. It gives it time for that opal to go bad. I might rub it out, maybe face it up a little bit to see what the color's there, but I'm not going to finish it, because if it crazes or cracks, I don't want to deal with that. So, but if I let it set for a while, and I keep mine in the garage, and so it's exposed to the different temperatures and this, that, and the other. So it depends on you. But if you go to a rock show and you buy some opal that day and you get home and you want to see what it looks like, I don't think there's any problem with grinding on it right away. Now, whether I'd want to finish it, that's a personal thing with me. I wouldn't want to finish it. I'd want to let it set for a while to see if it's going to crack or craze on me. Now, cracking and crazing is, precious opal has, depending on who you read, has between 6 and 12% water. Now, I once made a comment in our first lecture. I meant it as humor, but I had a friend named Tim Thomas one time tell me that if an opal was mined at a greater depth than 50 meters, it might be too wet. So if you start grinding on it, the water is going to heat up and crack your opal. That's what crazing is. You start grinding on an opal that's too wet, or it's got a high content of water, and it might craze or crack on you because of the expansion of the water. Boy, did I digress. Did I answer the question?
Pretty much. I'll share one other thought. I have a
Okay.
stone that looked gorgeous, charcoal black, really bright color, and it had been in water ever since I bought it, a piece of rough. Got it out, partially cut it, let it dry for 2 or 3 days, and it turned out to have a crack that the water made, you couldn't see the crack until the water dried out. Opal is naturally capable of fracturing. It's chemically almost identical with glass. So if it gets temperature shocked, and nobody actually knows why, but some opal just is not stable to start with. The structure just literally pulls itself apart. That's what crazing is. And it can happen from being too dry. A good fine opal that's high quality, if it's dried out in a bank vault or something, can fail because it's been dried out too drastically.
Yeah. As just to reiterate, as Russ was just saying, he found a crack that was being hidden by water. This is why I never finish opals when I first buy them. I like to face them out to see what I might get, but I'm going to let it set for a while. So if there is a problem, it'll surface.
A couple other questions. One is, can opal be worn daily, and what's the best way to take care of them? How easily are they scratched? And is there a special way to dry out wet opal?
Okay, some of that is going to be talked about at the end of this presentation. But you can wear opal every day. The thing you don't want to do is have it contact your skin every day. Opal is somewhat porous and will absorb body oils, and it may affect the color. I know particularly with Ethiopian, everybody kept telling me if it gets wet. So what I did one time, I took a stone that I purchased, a cab, and I put it in water for a couple of days, and sure enough, it went white on me. But I took it out of the water, set it on my kitchen windowsill, and in about 3 weeks, the color was back. Wasn't quite as brilliant, but it was back. So the thing with opal is is, and remember too that opal is somewhat fragile. If you're going to wash dishes, if you have a solid opal, the water's not going to hurt it. What's going to hurt that opal is banging around the dishes and the stuff that's in the sink. So you want to take the opal off. Now, if you're wearing a doublet or a triplet, that's a whole different ballgame. The last couple of slides of this presentation, we're going to talk about care of how to deal with the opal at that point. How it scratches. Opal is relatively soft. It's about a 6, between a 5 and a 6 on the Mohs scale. Mohs scale goes from 0 to 10. 10, diamond being the highest and talc being the lowest. So we're kind of in the middle. So anything that's lower than a 6 should not scratch opal, in theory. Okay.
The trouble is quartz is a 7, and almost all the dirt in the world is quartz.
Right.
So anytime an opal rubs a surface that's got dust or debris on it, it could get scratched.
Correct. Okay, another question?
Well, there's one. What about the danger of cutting opal dry? Silicosis.
Okay, silicosis is an issue. However, the amount of dust, for lack of a better term, that you get with an opal and the distance that you are, remember, the opal has got mass, and it's what happened. Where'd my presentation go? Help, Carol, Wakanda. All I see is faces. Oh, maybe I got to do this.
Go back to your sharing screen.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
You know, me, Mr. Technology, I thought we were going to be really up the creek there for a minute.
It's all okay.
Okay, it's possible. I only know one person that uses a mask when they cut opal, and she's just one of these people that's overly conscious of everything. You know, she's one of these. If the dirt isn't black and the sky isn't blue and the trees aren't green, the world's not right. One of those kind of people. That would, to me, would be up to you. I don't think there'll be enough dust generated that would get to your nostrils unless you were really down on top of that opal. Because again, opal's got mass, and the dust particles are going to fall out. That's, again, my opinion as a science teacher. How's that?
Well, I know one professional cutter who always cuts opal dry, but he uses a little fan next to his equipment that blows air across the area to clear the dust away from where he is.
Yep, that would work too. Okay.
That's it for questions.
Pardon?
That's it for questions.
Oh, okay, good, because I was starting to run out of answers. All right. Now, we talked about this base color a few minutes ago, so that's what we're going to talk about now, I think. Okay, base color. Now, base color is not the color, not the yellows and the blues and the greens you see. It's what's underneath all that. If you look at an opal and take away all the color, the base color is the color of the stone that's left without any play of color. Now, the way you look at that, well, you just look straight down at it, and there's several formulas for this. You can look straight down at it from anywhere from 12 to 20 inches with certain kinds of light, this, that, and the other. So, but the point is we're talking about the base color. For our purposes, for the purpose of this lecture, not of opal in general, okay, you're going to have a clear or transparent opal base. Now you can see here where you can see the color coming through this opal. That would be called a crystal opal. This is what we see mostly in this country, white opal, white-based opal. So what you're going to see is color. Now, I chose a really poor color one year to emphasize the fact that we're looking at the base color, not the flash. The next one, of course, I was just a pretty stone. All right, and then black base. Now these are, and I mentioned earlier, I'm going to show you a color scale that will show you these differences. So here, this is what when you're going to a jewelry store or you're looking on the internet, this is generally how they'll advertise them as either crystal, light-based, or black-based, even though there might be 4 or 5. Well, okay, I'll get to that in the next screen. Now, someone asked earlier about the value. Generally, the darker this base, the more expensive the opal. Now, there are exceptions. If you get a white-based opal that's got some really crazy color or some really weird pattern, you might make exceptions for that. But in general, the darker the base, the more expensive the opal. Now, here's one of a million different body tone charts. Now, in this country, this is what we see mostly down here. We rarely ever see this. Once in a while, we'll see these. Okay. Now, so again, this is what you're looking at underneath the fire. So as we go to the left, the more expensive the opal, in all things being equal. Okay. Now, the color that's on top of it, the play of color. Okay, the play of color. Someone asked earlier, what's the most sought after is red. I can't see if my red thing showed up because your faces are on top of it. Is there a little red gadget over here? Okay. And then the next question usually comes, what's the value of the colors? Okay, now this is coincidental. I didn't make this up. I read this sequence in several publications, but it also just happens to coincide with our buddy, Roy G. Biv, okay? So we know that red's the most expensive, or most sought after. And then we have orange, green, blue, purple. All right, so we have Roy G. Biv, almost, except for the purple. That probably should be indigo or something, but what can I say? All right, now, as far as color patterns, not patterns, we'll get to that later, how these colors, here, this would be considered a red opal because you see this predominantly red. Now, there's not a lot of orange here, but when I see that, the first thing that comes to my mind is that little orange things here, because that's unusual. So that might be considered an orange. Obviously a green, a blue. Now, I had to search for this one, but I haven't seen too many purple opals, but here we go. Okay, so there is a hierarchy to the color. Red is the most sought, red on black, red and orange on black. Okay, and then the other colors down the line there, green, blue, and purple. Now, you will see all the shades in between. When you're looking at an opal, you will see all the shades in between here. I mean, there could be 600 colors on an opal, not likely, but with all the frequencies between a pure green and a pure blue, there's a whole bunch of frequencies in there that produce color. Okay, brightness. Now, there are some people who think that brightness is the key to the value of an opal. I'm kind of sort of in that boat, but to me, it's kind of a toss-up between color combination and brightness. But all things being equal, the brighter a stone is, the more value it will have. So a bright black-based stone with red and orange on it is the ultimate. Well, give or take. But that's, if you can find one of those, you can retire. Well, not really. It has to be a big one, Okay. All right. The brightness, like I say, is the primary thing you look at when you look at an opal. The other three are base color, as we mentioned, the type of opal it is, and the weight of the opal. Now, weight with opal is not that important because an itty bitty, really pretty opal can be more expensive than a really big, not so pretty opal. So weight is important, but it's kind of a hedging factor, I guess, for lack of a better term. Okay, now, even though brightness is important, it's the one thing that's really hard to determine. But even with people that are experts, like Paul Downing, when he goes and looks at opals, he takes a set of stones with him because his mind can't remember the differences in the brightness. Try that sometime. It's almost impossible to do. So if you're a serious opal buyer, put together a set of stones that will show you the brightness. I have, matter of fact, I've got a set that Paul Downing put together. So if you ever come to a meeting and you want to see this thing, I'll have it with me. And if you want to try to emulate it somewhere, you're welcome to do that. But if you're a serious buyer, you might want to be able to determine the brightness. Because if you go into a shop in this country and you ask them what the brightness is, they're probably not going to know. Not going to know. Now, when you go into the shop, you want to make sure you look at the opal under different lights. The lights in the showcase are going to be different than the lights he has to light his store. And if you can get him to escort you, or you know the guy well enough, take the piece of jewelry over to the window and look at it in daylight and in sunlight, because it's gonna make that opal look different. I think in our first lecture, I think I showed you an opal that I have. It was the same opal was taking pictures of 4 different angles, and it looked like 4 different stones. Color, the green, I mean, the colors changed and everything. So the same thing with the brightness. Now, one of the things you can do to check brightness is if you have a stone, if you got a stone or a piece of jewelry, if you take that, hold it out in front of your face, and then just slowly move it away into a shaded area. And as long as you can see a flash of color, that'll tell you how that opal will react in different light intensities. Again, you have to be somewhat experienced. Stan McCall's got a piece of opal. All it's got in it looks like a piece of blue lightning. But you can put that thing under the table and you can still see that blue lightning strike. It just doesn't go away. And that's a bright stone. Again, brightness is important, but it's a tough factor to be cognizant of, because the human faculties aren't cut out for that. But there is some help. This is not going to be much help, but you can get a brightness chart. Now, this one is from an outfit called the Opal Association. The Lightning Ridge Miners Association has one. There must be 20 or 30 brightness charts out there. So you can ask the dealer if he has one of these. If you're doing it on the internet, unless he has it posted, and he might have a chat thing where you can say, hey, dealer, show me a brightness chart. Or, hey, dealer, what is the brightness of this parcel so-and-so? You're going to be pretty much at the mercy of the camera. All right, should we have any questions on that so far? I want to take.
I'll mention one thing from personal experience, or things I've heard. You mentioned how sometimes it's hard to find purple. My understanding is the first opal that shows color play will be purple, and it's the most common. Therefore, it's the least valuable, and a lot of miners won't even bring it to the market because there's hardly anybody willing to pay anything for it. It's not worth the trouble to bring it. So the purple opal is awkward to find. And it's kind of an unusual characteristic of it. But those of us who love purple, you know.
Okay, all right. So now we're going to take these colors and we're going to say, okay, what are the combinations? Well, there are probably a kabillion names for opal patterns. However, one of my favorite sources has narrowed it down to 7 categories. So all opal patterns are going to fall in to one of these 7 categories. Okay, it's first one is pinfire. Now, as you can see, that's pretty obvious why it's called a pinfire. Now, if I made this smaller, these blotches are going to look a little smaller, and they're going to look more like pinfire. But just small circles or little small patches of color on the base. Then we have a flash fire. Again, we got irregular patches. You see these patches are different colors, okay? But they're just all over the stone. You don't see a whole lot of dead spots in there. Now, I didn't know if I've ever used that term before, dead spot. Dead spot is a term used to identify a surface on the opal that doesn't show color. Okay, you can have a really pretty opal from 90 degrees, but if you turn it over to 60 degrees, you got nothing. Okay, so there's a dead spot there. All right, then you got a broad flash. You got the same thing here, except the patterns are much wider. Okay, you got sheets of color as opposed to little blotches, or larger blotches, I guess. And then a rolling flash is you take the flash fire and it rolls over. If you move this stone back and forth, that green thing will roll from left to right on that opal. Okay, harlequin. For some reason, this has been designated as the superstar. So if you have a black-based opal that's got red and orange in this pattern, you got a big opal. Now, the name, does anybody know where harlequin comes from? Y'all know. If you were a clown, your clown suit has got that checkered patch. Most clown suits, you know, they've got that checkered pattern in the suit. Well, that's the guy who named it. That's what he named it after, the clown suits. So this is the harlequin. It's got angular or almost rectangular or square patches all over the surface of the stone. Now, these patterns I'm showing you on black because they show up better, but they can show up on gray and sometimes on lighter based opals. Okay, then we have rare patterns. In this case, we got the Chinese writing. You know, this you'll see frequently. You'll see a lot of Chinese writing. They're just definite stripes or patterns that don't mix together. They're just very independent of each other. And they almost look like Chinese or Korean or Old Sanskrit or whatever. And picture stones. Now, because of all the forest fires in California, I chose this one because it looks like a forest. Or if you look at it, it looks like trees in there. So I thought maybe I would put a little color back in the state. But remember I told you these patterns can show up on different bases. If you look at this one, this is clear or semi-clear. So these patterns can show up on different body tones. All righty. Now, let's get to what we're talking about. The main purpose of this is what to look for when you go into a jewelry store. Now, again, opals aren't, you can buy inexpensive opals, and I just showed you some ways that you can have the opal look for less money. But if you're going to be in the market for a genuine, solid, reasonably expensive opal, the person you buy it from, you want to know a little bit about that jeweler. Now, in today's world of box stores, it's hard to find a mom and pop jeweler anymore. The last one I knew of was down the street here called Fox Jewelers. And about 5 years ago, all of a sudden, it was a launderer. I go, what happened to Fox? Well, I don't know. But he was a family guy. But so now you're more inclined to go to Kay's or Jessup's. Well, if you live in San Diego, you'll know who Jessup's is. That's where I bought my wedding rings for my wife. You didn't need to know that, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. You know, there's all kinds of box stores out there. So what you have to do is you have to go in and you're going to have to make a snap evaluation of who you're buying from. Well, what you want to do is go to the different malls, go into the different stores and see what they look like. Okay, are their stores well lit? Are they clean? And are they organized? Why is that important? Well, if you go into a shop that's well maintained, the management of that store is probably going to be somewhat astute in whatever he does, and possibly in selecting the merchandise for his stores. Now, having been a corporate level merchandiser for an old company named Montgomery Ward, sometimes you don't have that opportunity. You have a buyer that buys a lot, and then the store breaks it, the company breaks it up into parcels and sends every store a parcel. Well, that happens. But even so, the store manager or the store management does have some say-so over whether or not that parcel he wants to put out or not. Okay, now when you're looking at the store, does it say that it's a junk shop? Or does it look like you're going to buy fine jewelry in there? Again, is the store, is it clean? Is it organized? You know, that kind of thing. That's important to me. That tells me that someone's paying attention. All right, then I would look at the displays, which is probably more important than the store. But again, you want to look at the displays. Are they well laid out? Or is there some organization to the displays? Is there more than one opal in there? And we're only talking about opals, so. And then are they going to have a wide selection of opal? Now, again, in this country, probably not. They might have a dozen opal rings in there, but they're going to be all the same thing. They're going to be white based with some kind of pin fire. Very little broad flash. Once in a while, you'll find an opal that's got a gray base to it. Now, I haven't shopped for opals for a long time, but unless it's changed, I'm pretty sure this is what you'll find. Okay, next thing, you don't want to get the guy over there with the t-shirt, his blue jeans, with his face in his cell phone, chewing gum, selling you opal. All right, if you want to get to know that sales staff, is the he or she? Hey, when I say sales staff, guys, I don't want to keep saying he or she. It's understood, he or she. Okay, I don't want to get any nasty letters about being what is that, gender inhibited or whatever. Okay, all right. Are they knowledgeable? Ask them some questions. Now, if you've seen all three of these lectures, you're going to have some material to ask that these guys aren't going to have a whole lot of clue about. But if they give you a reasonable attempt at it, you're gonna say, okay, at least he's heard the terms, or he's got some autos up here. For you Koreans out there, autos is what? Intelligence? Yeah, who cares? Okay, are they helpful? All right. Is he just going to sit there and say, oh, hi, go back to his phone? Yeah, we got opals over there, go back to his phone. No, you want the guy to be helpful. You want him to be well dressed, or I do anyway. I'd like that, preferably in a suit, looking like he's selling me a piece of fine jewelry. So that the way the store looks has a lot to do with your opinion on whether you're going to buy there. Now, this is a little out of place because this was an afterthought. Whenever you're buying jewelry, whether it's on the internet or in a store, always ask for a signed certificate of authenticity. Okay, this is good because if you're buying an expensive opal, you want it for your insurance purposes. Okay, not only that, but if you get the thing home and all of a sudden the stone comes loose and you say, oh, look, this isn't solid, it's a doublet. You want to hold your dealer accountable. So with that certificate of authenticity, you can go back to the dealer and say, hey, what did you do to me here? So always try to get a certificate of authenticity. Now, I was going to say that last, but okay. When you're looking at the jewelry, some things you want to look at. if you're looking at individual stones, you're going to look at a lot of stones anyway. I mean, I rarely walk into a opal show or a gem show and buy the first thing I pick up. I like to look around a little bit. Well, the same thing when you're buying jewelry. You might say, okay, I'm going to buy a pendant. Well, pick up 4 or 5 pendants, have a look at them, heft them out, see what turn them over, things like that. You want to be able to touch, you want to be able to feel this thing because, for a couple of reasons. One, if it's a simulant, it's going to feel really light. It's going to have an awkward feel to it. Gold and opal together, for the size of the object you're weighing out in your or hefting in your hand, it's going to be noticeable. If it's noticeable to you that it's really light, then you might ask, you know, what is it? What is it? Is it a doublet, triplet, simulant? You want to roll the piece around in your hand. You want to see the color. Where does the color go away? Does it have a dead spot? Does it have multiple colors when it shows? And as I mentioned earlier, you want to look at that piece under different light sources. You know, maybe you look at it under the lights they have on the counter. Take it away from the counter a couple of feet and look under the stores. Because a lot of times stores will have fluorescent lights in them. Now, fluorescent lights affect the blues in opal, and it'll look different than it does under an incandescent light. Again, if you saw the first display, the first lecture, we took a look at that. So look at the purchase under different kinds of light, whether again it be a piece of jewelry or an individual opal. Okay, another reason you want to have it in your hand is you want to turn this thing over and look at the back. If it's got an open back, you can see that the color's coming through. You can check to see if the opal cab fits against the base of the bezel without any pieces underneath. It's a good clean fit. It's not going to crack on you because it's got something stuck under there. You're going to be able to see that it's a solid opal. Do the same thing on the top if it's a ring or a pendant that has prongs. Look at the prongs real close. Make sure that they're not, where they attach, that they aren't loose, or there's not cracks or small conchoidal fractures where whoever set the stone might have pressed too hard on the prong. So look at those little fine points like that, because that will affect the value of that stone should you ever get it insured or want to resell it. Okay, well, as I mentioned, look at the back. You want to make sure that it fits snug. Also, too, looking at the back of the opal, if you can't see the opal, if it's in a bezel set that's got a back, then you need to start asking the jeweler questions. You might ask him, again, is it a doublet, triplet, simulant? Is it, get a little more inquisitive, because he may be telling you it's a solid opal, and it's not. And he may be charging you solid opal prices, and you've got a simulant in your hand, and the price is going to be about 1/10 of a solid opal. So you want to be careful that you don't get taken to the cleaners, so to speak. All right, always ask about a guarantee and return policy. The guarantee on an opal is tough because opal to begin with is fragile. If you take the thing home and bang it up against a dish while you're washing dishes, which you shouldn't be doing with an opal, you got to expect that that's going to happen. So I don't know how you guarantee an opal, and unless you get it home and look at it under 100 microscope. Let me try that again. 100 power microscope, and you find 3 or 4 cracks. You might go back and say, hey, well, this opal's cracked. But more importantly, just if you don't like it, can you return it? If you bought it as a gift, if the person doesn't like it, can you return it, or can you exchange it? So make sure you understand what that policy is when you leave the store. All right, is there any questions on buying opal jewelry in a store?
I want to share one comment that if an opal setting is solid metal on the back, there's more metal. And if it's gold, it's going to cost more for the metal. And if it's a simulant or a doublet, the opal is almost no value at all. If the back is empty, the metal is less expensive, and the value of the jewelry piece will be because the opal is a good opal that has value in its own, the opal itself.
Yeah, I think in our first lecture, we mentioned that if in this country, when you go into a jewelry store and look at a piece of jewelry, it's going to be white-based opal in a gold setting. Well, probably 80% of the cost of that piece of jewelry is the gold, not the opal. So buying opal can be pretty tricky. All right, any other questions on that? All right, let's take a look at the internet. All right, so the obvious reasons. What's good about the internet is you can buy direct from sources. You don't necessarily have to buy from a retailer, although there's enough of them on there, you can do that. You can find sites that have both sellers, miners, wholesalers, retailers, all listing their merchandise on the same website. And one of the values of that is it drives the prices down. So if you find a website that has sellers, buyers, and miners, and they're all over the world, so you've got people from South America bidding against people in Australia, and maybe designers in Austria. I mean, so you get this whole world in one shoebox, so to speak. So your selection becomes infinite, and your buying power becomes multiplied because now you have competition. If you go into a store, you go into the Brea Mall and you go into one of the stores there, all they're worried about is the indoor and the outdoor. Everything outside, they don't care. They're going to try to sell you what's in that store. But the internet gives you that worldwide market, so to speak. Okay, buying on the internet is pretty much like buying in a store. You want to find a site that's reputable. Now, how do you know if a site is reputable? Well, if a recommendation from a friend or somebody who's purchased from it before, or you do your own research. You know, you might look up, I'm sure the internet's got a Better Business Bureau of some sort. A lot of websites will have testimonials. Read those. Even my opinion, a lot of times those testimonials, I think, are culled somewhat, but the information that's in there, you might be looking for a piece of information that they can give you insight on in kind of a backhanded way. So read a few. So get to know that site with some research, testimonials, and if you're not sure, buy something inexpensive from them. Maybe buy maybe a half-carat white-based pinfire opal for $40, and see how long it takes you to get the opal. How is it wrapped when it gets there, when it gets to your house? Did it look like they just threw it in a box, or is it in a little plastic baggie? And was it taken care of? And that'll tell you a little bit about the people who are running that website. Okay, does that website have a lot of information about opal? There's a couple of websites like Opal Auctions and Max Opals and Opals Down Under. You go to those websites and they've got pages of information on different types of opal, talk about the play of color. I mean, everything I've talked about so far in these 3 lectures, you can find on the internet. Matter of fact, there's one opal, I forgot the name of the site, but at the end of on their last page, they got a link that will take you to a list of hundreds of articles appertaining to opal. So if this site have a lot of information, if they have a lot of information available to you, that would tell me that they're not afraid of opal, that they understand opal, and that they don't care if you're smart. They're going to deal with somebody who's interested in buying, a good opal, and that they're talking to somebody who is interested. Okay, do they have a wide range of products? My experience with that is I bought something one time from a person who only sold a certain type of opal. And so when I got it, it was okay. It was a nice piece. But when I went back to them and asked them to compare it to something else, their knowledge base was somewhat limited. So if the website has a wide range of products, that's going to be good for you, because then you're going to know that they can tell you about the different kinds of opal that they have for sale, and hopefully answer all of your questions. Okay, here's a biggie. This is my favorite. Well, it's not it's one of my favorites. Have you ever tried to buy opal on eBay? Now, if you go to eBay, I get these things every day from eBay. 10,000 new listings, blah, 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 blah. So you go there, and probably 90% of their offering is Wellow opal. And they just show you this really brilliant piece of opal, and it looks great. And they want 99 cents for it. And you're going, what? Well, anyway, but there's no size comparison. Nothing could be the size of a pea for all you know. So what you want to see, that if they're going to show you opal, have some frame of reference. I mean, what are you buying? Are you buying, a 1/10 of a carat of something, or are you buying 12 carats? Is contacted? Now, here's my favorite, contact. You ever try to get hold of somebody? Nowadays, nobody wants to talk to you. They all want you to chat. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not a chatty person. And when I have to write something down, it loses its meaning somewhere. So I like to talk to people. But then again, I'm an old guy. All right, and so if there's some kind of contact, you want it to be readily available. And if they have legal information about are they incorporated? Are they a limited partnership? Do they have some kind of credentials? Or are they just a guy that bought a bag of opals and decided he didn't want them? So instead of going to eBay, he just said, hey, guys, I got some opal for sale. Come and get it. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, websites also have, and it's important, this is important with website, is guarantees and return policies. Because in a store, you can actually touch, in a jewelry show, you can actually touch the pieces. But when you're buying from the internet, you can't. So it's paramount that you deal with a website who's willing to deal with returns and dissatisfied customers. Okay. Now, when you're looking at opal on the internet, you don't want to look at the opal on a black background. Well, you'll notice that a lot of opal pictures are on black backgrounds. That's because opal looks better on a back. It makes it look better. So if they don't have their opal displayed on neutral backgrounds like this, or actually on someone's flesh, if they have a chat, just type in here. Do you have a photo or something? Or something they can send you. I was just going to say, can they put it up? No, they probably have to text you a picture or something. I'm not that familiar with the texting. That's a Russ Mattson thing, or Berkenda, but you can't see her. She's hiding somewhere. Anyway, she could answer that question. So you want to make sure that you can see the opal against something other than a black background. You'll get a truer idea of what that opal looks like once you get it in your hands. Again, related to this, what you see on the internet is not necessarily what you're going to see when it shows up. Cameras. There must be 1,000 different cameras out there, and there must be 10,000 different kinds of lenses. There must be hundreds of different kinds of filters. You get an unscrupulous dealer who might use a blue lens to take pictures of an opal to make it look a certain way. So again, with the return policy and the guarantee policy, and that certificate of authenticity, if you get something that you don't think is what is represented, you have some way to deal with that. Again, I mentioned opals being somewhat fragile. Now, don't get me wrong. You don't have to baby the opal, but don't be stupid. You know, don't like I say. You can put your hands in dishwater with an opal, but the dilemma is if you bang it against the dishes that are in the water. Of course, you don't want to do that with a doublet or a triplet because that's not good. It'll start dissolving away and the expansion differences. So when you first get the opal, make sure you inspect it. I have a friend who buys art, and when he gets the boxes, the first thing he does is he opens the top of the box and peels it back a little bit and takes a picture of the piece of art in the box. This way here, if there's some damage, he can say, well, it was in the box. And of course, a guy like me, well, yeah, you damaged it and put it back in the box. So anyway, that can go both ways. All right, here's one that you don't think about a lot of times, and I've had some bad experiences. You go to a website to think you're buying opal, but the website says OPEL. So you click on it, and it shows opal, but it's somewhat questionable as to the quality. So if you go to a site that the name doesn't sound opalish, that it doesn't sound like the name of a site that would carry opal, be a little cognizant of that. The other thing is, hang on a minute, guys. Love that cherry vanilla Coke. When you're looking at these websites, look at the suffix .net as opposed to .com, as opposed to .org. They all can mean different things. So if you see a top level domain ending that doesn't seem right, that doesn't mean don't go visit the website. Just be aware that you might have to be a little bit more on your toes because there may be some things there that aren't necessarily normal. And then one that I just learned about recently, and I called Russ and said, "Hey Russ, I just found this nifty piece of information," and I could see Russ's face on the phone going, "Okay, all right, I'm going to humor this boy." "Oh, really? That's interesting." But then later on, he tells me he knows about it all the time. So when you're looking at these sites for opals, when you're looking at the URL numbers, if it starts with a HTTPS, that S is important. That's another layer of protection for your credit card. I forgot exactly what that stands for. Do you remember what it was, Russ? Secure or something?
Secure.
Anyway,
It's
a lot of, oh, I'm sorry.
The website is encrypted and secure.
Right. Matter of fact, Google, they won't, if the site doesn't have that S, they won't display it. They'll give you an idea how important that is. Okay, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. I don't know if we're gonna, yeah, all right. All right, when you're online, you're gonna see something that says, no reserve online auction. Now this basically has to do with rough. Sometimes you see already jewelry, but I haven't seen too many, but usually with rough. Now, what's nice about these online no reserve auctions is that you control the price. Okay, you can determine what you're willing to pay for it, and then you stop. Now, so you say, okay, so what has that got to do with the seller? Well, if the seller has a piece of jewelry out there, or he has a piece of, or a parcel of rough out there, and all the people willing to pay only goes to a certain level, then he's going to know that he's got to change his price. So hopefully he's going to bring it down. Most people don't over, they usually under, but it'll give you some guidance So the opal dealer will know how to price his parcel. So it's kind of a check and balance for the consumer. By you stopping your bid, you'll be helping other bidders by knowing that there is a level to which that particular parcel might be valued at. Okay, now again, if you're new at buying opal, this is a good place to start. Again, you might want to start with a no reserve auction, but also don't buy rough. Buy rubs. And rubs is opal that's been partially cleaned up a little bit. And the reason you do that is you get a little better idea of what you're buying. So it's a little less riskier for you. It might cost you a little bit more because there was, if nothing else, some labor involved in cleaning this up. But no reserve auctions are good if you just want to kind of get your feet wet, because you have a budget, you know how much you're willing to spend, and the prices you're going to wind up paying for these are probably going to be pretty good as a general rule, because the bidding will level out. Okay, someone earlier asked, or last week asked, why do they show opal when it's wet? And they do that basically to show the colors that can become. You could take a piece of opal like this, and this piece right here, okay, if once you finish that out, not likely, it might wind up looking like this, but this tells you that piece has got a color bar in there that's worth taking your time and working with. When you're looking at the opal, and it's going to be hard to tell when you're looking at it, but if you're at a show, of course you can deal with it. But if that color bar is really thin and you're not an experienced cutter, you might say to yourself, well, it's going to need some reinforcing of some sort. You're going to be talking about a triplet or a doublet, and you, as an inexperienced cutter, want to deal with that. On the internet, it's going to be tough to tell that. If the internet has a chat, you might shoot them say, okay, parcel full, and so what is the thickness of that? Or you might be able to communicate somehow. Okay. And of course, the ultimate, if you modify it, you own it. In a store, if you drop a piece of something off a counter, most of the time they'll kind of let it slide. Every once in a while, you'll find a store owner that'll make you pay for it. But on the internet, if you buy a parcel, it shows up and you modify it in any way, clean it, shape it, sand it, whatever, and try to return it, not going to happen. My guess is, or I know what I would do, if I was the seller, every parcel that I sent out, I'd have a picture of. So if you sent it back and I see modified pieces, I'm going to say, well, this isn't the parcel that I sent you. So just be aware that if you break it, modify it, it's yours. Okay, and the last section that we're going to talk about today is what was asked earlier about caring for opals. And we'll start with solid opals. Common sense. If you remove that opal ring or that pendant, if you're washing dishes, take it off. If you're stocking groceries, take it off. You know, if you're doing something where there's a possibility that opal is going to bang against something, just take it off. All right. Don't take the chance of it being scratched. As I mentioned earlier, solid opals in water is okay. Matter of fact, there's water in opal, and sometimes you have to use water to rehydrate an opal. You're more likely to have a problem with an opal in dry conditions than you would in wet conditions. Now, we talked earlier about safe deposit boxes. It turns out, I guess there's several levels of safe deposit box. I guess the low level, you just go in there and buy a box and they give you a key and you put your junk in there. And then they've got other boxes that are in rooms that are dehydrated, or they got, or some of them are humidified, but they've got different types of rooms. So, but the point here is, if you have an opal and you put it in a dry environment, it just might suck the moisture out of the opal, and it's going to change that opal, might change the color of that opal. So make sure if you're going to dry it, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, how do you clean an opal, solid opal? Very simple. Nothing magical. You don't need to buy special. People got stuff out there. You go to some of these opal stores. It's like you go to the guy who's selling your glasses. He's got these really nifty bottles of glass cleaner. Well, it's alcohol with perfume in it, probably. But same thing with opal. Just warm water and detergent, and a really mild detergent, and use a soft brush or cloth if you have prongs or if you need to get into an area. So there's nothing really secret about cleaning a solid opal. Now notice I'm stressing here, solid opal, okay? Things are going to change on the next slide. Are you guys ready? I thought so. All right, triplets and doublets. Okay, this is a little different for cleaning solids because there's more than one piece involved here. There are layers, and as I mentioned before, they're glued. And the two layers, or in the case of a triplet, the three layers, may not have the same thermodynamics. So when you're cleaning it, you have to be careful. You don't want to put it in a liquid. You want to use a damp cloth. Okay, put the cleaning solution on a damp cloth and wipe it down that way the best you can. Now the problem with the water is if the water gets in between those layers, it will cause the layers to start separating because that glue might dissolve. And of course, once the glue gets infiltrated, it'll spread all over the stone. And you'll know when that happens because your stone will start looking pretty cloudy. And then you can do a couple things. You can take it to a jeweler, and he might be able to recap it or something. But anyway, you want to, water and opals and doublets aren't a good idea. Well, I just said that. Did I put two things in here that said the same thing? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, there it is. Damp cloth. Try to stay away from immersing doublets and triplets into water. Okay. Never use an ultrasonic cleaner to clean opals. If it's a solid opal, there's a possibility of it cracking. If it's an assembled opal, again, the vibration will affect the different densities of the layers of the material, and it might cause it to separate. So you don't want to use an ultrasonic cleaner. If the stone loses its shine or it scratches, professional cleaning, take it to a jeweler. Hopefully the jeweler will, he himself might have some experience at cleaning and restoring stones. However, again, using Stan McCall as an example, I've gone into his shop a couple times and he'll be working on opals, and he has contracts with various opal and with various jewelry stores, and he'll do some of their repair work, particularly on opal stuff. So somewhere along the line, it'll get to a professional cleaner who will know how to repolish the stone. Now, as I mentioned in the first lecture, sometimes if you repolish a stone, that changes the surface characteristics of that stone. So the color, when you get it back, the color might look a little bit different. Okay, storage. Short term, just stick it in a padded bag, so it doesn't bang around, and just store it. Put it in your jewel box or wherever you normally put your jewelry. Long term, a good way to do this is just dampen a small piece of cotton wool, or wool cotton, however you want to say that, a few drops of water, put that into a plastic bag and seal it. And that way here, you'll have moisture. Now, this is not, what happens here is the moisture keeps the moisture in the opal from coming out because equilibrium, it won't be dry and the opal won't be trying to get to the dry area. So if you have a moist environment, the opal will pretty much maintain itself. And with that, I think we are done.
Now we're pretty near out of time too. There's a couple of questions. I'll just take them real quick. One is one of our guests is a bench jeweler who's asking how to determine what price to charge for the jewelry this person is making. I'm going to let you comment on that, Pete, but just one more thing first. Someone wanted to know about a home safe versus a bank safety deposit box. Home safes are fine. They're in the same humidity as the household.
Right.
So that's not an issue. That's definitely okay. And how's the best way to determine how to set a stone? It's always preferred that it be a bezel setting because it protects the edges of the stone. Prongs are used, but they can produce pressure in specific areas of the opal, and that can be a detail that's difficult. Properly pushed over, prongs can be fine, but there's always the issue of that exposes lots of the opal to being hit or bumped into. But Pete, maybe you should comment on how a jeweler can decide how much to charge for their finished results.
When you say finished results, is it a sense of cleaning or is it a sense of assembling?
No. A bench jeweler that's making opal jewelry wants to know how much to charge for the retail result.
Okay. Well, first thing, whether you value your time or not. So you put a value, let's say it takes you 2 hours to make the piece. So you add your time. Then your raw materials, how much did the gold cost you? Now, the big problem is how much is that opal? Yeah, that's a tough one because the price range on opals is probably as wide as you can possibly make it. There is some guidance, as I mentioned earlier. Where did you get the opal? What did you pay for the opal? So that'll give you a starting point. So you're going to want to at least recover what you paid for the opal. Now, well, no, I got to find a nice way to say this. I've been involved in certain industries. How's that? Where keystone seems to be popular. So if you don't know what to do with it, keystone it. And if it sells, good. You might want to bump it some more. If it doesn't sell, then break it down. But that's a tough question to ask or answer. I have, sometimes the Opal Society will have meetings where we will do opal evaluations. People will bring opals in, and we have this process that we go through. In order to get an opal evaluated here locally, there's not too many places I can think of where you can go. But again, the darker the base, the more expensive the opal, the more color, the more expensive. But there is no formula for opal, if that's what he's looking for. See, like diamonds, you can go to any diamond store anywhere in the world and say, I want a 1 carat S1 diamond. And he can go to his little chart and say, okay, the diamond, De Beers says this is how much it's going to cost. And then he has to decide whether he wants to sell it for that, but he's got guidance. But with opal, there is no pricing guidance. If this guy's a jeweler and he wants to spend $40, he can go buy Paul Downing's book. I don't know, I don't know if you can see this or not. It fades out. Anyway, it's called Opal Identification and Value. In there is he has a bunch of charts and some ways to evaluate opal that you can come up with a pretty good market price. So if you're a jeweler and you want to get into the opal business, that might be a good thing to buy. You can join the Lightning Ridge Opal Miners Association, they have information available. Gems or the Lapidary Journal and Rock and Gems, I forgot which, every month they used to publish a chart that would give the going price of a 1 carat of whatever, emerald or sapphire, whatever. I don't recall them ever seeing on opal, but they might. And the other thing too is just look at the opal market. See what opals are selling for, maybe emulate that. But there's valuing an opal is not easy. Now, after you've done it for a while, you can come up with a general idea. I mean, like if I saw a 1 carat white based opal with not a whole lot of fire and assume it came from Cooper Pedy, I would say maybe anywhere from 60 to 100 bucks. I mean, but that came after a little bit of exposure to that. And even that, there might be people who disagree with that. Russ might look at it differently. Veronica might look at it a different way. Or the jeweler that asked the question, he may be a nice guy and say, okay, I'm going to do 40 to 80. So that's a tough question. Anything else? Or did that answer the guy's question?
Pretty much, I think so.
Okay.
We probably should call it a day.
Okay. All right. So,
Well, thank you so much. There was so much wonderful information shared by both you, Russ, and definitely by you, Pete. I'm sure that we could probably go on for another hour getting information. It was just a lot of wonderful information. Let me remind you that this has been recorded and will be available on our MUZEO website, which is www.museo.org. And let us know that your thoughts on this program and others that we've had. We want to continue to give relevant programs, interesting programs, educational programs to the community. And this is one of the ways that we're able to do it with your input. I'd like to say a special thank you to Burkinda in the background. She's the technical wizard that gets all of this working together. Thank you to you, Russ, for your input. And of course to you, Pete, for your knowledge and this wonderful presentation that has brought us so much closer to understanding this amazing gem. As you always write it in capital letters, opals. So thank you for that. And to all of you, whether it was your first time signing on or it was the third time in the series that you signed on, thank you so much for taking this time on a Sunday afternoon to join us. And so until the next time, have a look at our website so that you'll know what's happening and what we're doing. And until the next time you sign in with us, enjoy the rest of your day, weekend, stay well, stay safe.
Veronica, where's that live cat I saw? Didn't I see a live cat at the beginning?
He left a little while ago to go lie